Welcome, first time listeners and returners to FYI. Follow Your Intuition, where we hope to provide some of the most inspirational, motivational, and educational tools for your intuitive toolbox. We want you, with your newfound superpower, to believe in your compass, listen to your inner voice, trust your gut, and follow your sixth sense, your intuition. We hope you enjoy this amazing interview with today's incredible guest, right here in FYI. We're so honored on this fourth day of Emotional Intelligence and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a call to action. Please do your monthly self-breast examinations, as prevention is the key. To welcome Emmy-nominated TV producer, international best-selling author, speaker, podcast host, soon to be, Netflix sleeper star and thought leader, Stephanie Arnold. In 2013, she was clinically dead for 37 seconds after suffering an amniotic fluid embolism, an AFE, immediately after giving birth to her second child. But she knew it was going to happen months before because she had premonitions about it, but no one believed her. She blew doctors away because of what she described in detail about what happened while she was dead. But the one person who also understandably skeptical was her anesthesiologist. But despite her skepticism, she made sure there was extra blood available during the delivery, and it was a big reason why she was able to survive. Oh, and the anesthesiologist's name, ironically, was Grace. She was in a medically induced coma for 6 days afterwards. 2 years later, she published her book, 37 Seconds, which she'll talk about today, which is about survival, premonitions, intuition, the past, the present, and the future. And she's part of a new Netflix series called Surviving Death. She currently serves on the board of directors for the AFE Foundation and was named one of today's Chicago Women's 100 Women of Inspiration. She has a club on Clubhouse called The Sixth Sense, and it was on Breakfast with Champions that I first heard her story. She's competed in bikini bodybuilding competitions. She shares a birthday with Satchel Paige, Ringo Starr, and Michelle Kwan, and was born the same year as Mark Wahlberg, Winona Ryder, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Chris Tucker. She's an amazing mom and wife. She's inspired millions around the globe and is on a mission to help others realize that connecting with our sixth sense can not only enhance our lives, but can very well save them. She now dedicates her time to speaking and advocacy work, spreading awareness about positive doctor communication, trauma recovery, and discovering meaning and purpose in our personal and professional lives. She's been featured on Dr. Oz, Good Morning America, Netflix, Today, NPR, Steve Harvey, and many others. And today we will talk about her incredible story of trauma to triumph. You can find her on her website at stephaniearnold.net and on Twitter and Instagram at stephaniearnold37, of course. Stephanie, it was really an honor to meet you on Clubhouse and for you to take the time out today. Welcome to the first ever episode of FYI, Follow Your Intuition.
This is awesome. And what a great intro. I need to take you everywhere. It's like beautifully written. I'm like, I know some of the stuff. I'm like, wow, okay, that's awesome. Ringo Starr. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. We always talk about whether or not we should do that in post-production, but the reactions, it's been great. So we just keep doing it, even though it's like, wow, that was a long intro. Or, some of the stuff you can't find on your website. And the only way I knew it is by listening to you, on Clubhouse.
Yeah.
So
No, that was fun. So it just proves you were listening.
Yeah, I was an active listener. Absolutely. So when we had Barbara on, speaking of Barbara Majeski from the Today Show, she talked about, and she did it again today on Clubhouse, Clubhouse's Breakfast with Champions. So she talked about her Jewish heritage, and it was fascinating. And as I'm Jewish as well, and we both talked about how, despite the challenges we may have faced growing up, our tight-knit families and the Jewish traditions help guide us. And so, can you talk about your upbringing as a Latina Jewish woman? Because I'm fascinated by the various layers that you bring to the table, especially in this space.
Yeah. So I'm Juban, which is a Cuban Jew.
Are you allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
you are a Jew. I've never heard that before. I feel like that if I said that or something, that's like not
not
appropriate.
derogatory. It's like
Really, a
how we,
Jubin.
yeah, how we
Wow,
identify. Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
So I think some people have called it like a Q Jew or something like that, but I like the
Wow.
term Jubin, and people are like, what? They're Jews in Cuba.
Fascinating.
So yeah, so my father's from Cuba, my mother's from Illinois,
Wow.
and my grandfather, my mother's father, was in the mob, so in the Jewish mob, and so
Wow.
ties go real deep there. But he used to box for Meyer Lansky, if you can believe it. So
Wow.
crazy, crazy, crazy. Like, yeah, there are Jews in sports, right? So
Yes, but boxing was a thing back in the
what
day. Like, yeah, absolutely,
it
especially for
was.
Jews. Yeah.
Yeah. So, my upbringing, I grew up in an Orthodox temple setting.
Wow.
So I
So for
still
people that are listening, and when you go to temple, if you're Orthodox, the women sit
on one
separately
side.
from the
Yeah.
men, right? So
Yeah.
everything is separate. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't because we were so religious. It's just, when my parents were poor, they had no place to go to temple. And the Orthodox synagogue, or what we call the shul,
Yeah.
was like, no, if you're Jewish, just come, don't worry about it. So my father never
Wow.
forgot that. And so as
Hmm.
he made money, he would donate money to that temple. And so we would end up going there. And so that rabbi ended up becoming like a second father to me. So just, it was all I ever knew. And then I went to parochial school. I went to a Jewish day school
Hmm.
through 8th grade, and then went to a non-sectarian school for high
Hmm.
school.
Mhm.
Went to high school in Israel, stayed in Israel for a few months.
Wow.
I knew I was never going to live there, but it was a way for me to feel like I was connected to them when I got back. There was also this side of me that was very secular. And so I had the opportunity at 19 years old to direct a music video for Julio Iglesias. The only time he wanted to do it was on Rosh Hashanah. And I was,
God.
I was like, oh, well, this is not God testing me, right? Like, this is not, I mean, here I am. I'm Shomer Shabbat, which is like, I'm a religious Jew. I am, eating only in kosher restaurants. I am,
Tell everybody what
so
Rosh Hashanah is for people that don't
Yeah,
know.
Rosh Hashanah is a Jewish New Year. It's one of the
Right.
holiest days of the year. And
Right.
so if you talk to most Jews that talk about their twice a year Jews, they go to temple on Rosh Hashanah. This is when they start being inscribed in the book of life. Like this is the full circle of the year of all the drama they've lived on their life. They've lied, they've stolen, they've done whatever they want.
Right.
They want redemption. This is the
Yes.
period, the 10 days of repentance.
Yes.
And I am making the decision to direct a music video for Julio Iglesias. So, I decided, when am I ever going to get this opportunity again? I was really by myself in my religious pursuit. And so I was like, all right, screw it. So I did the video, and then I had worked with Celine Dion in Spanish. Like, the career kind of took off there, but there was always something pulling me spiritually, like guilting me, like, why are you doing this? And so that's kind of how the career took off.
Where did you go to college?
I went to University of Miami.
Wow.
I'm a hurricane. My husband got his degrees from University of Chicago, and he got his graduate and PhD from University of Chicago. And
You
I
had
went,
premonitions when you were younger, but you didn't really know what they were. And so can you touch on when your earliest memory of those were, and not looking back on it, like what happened with those? Or
my earliest memory was my grandmother. So I was 10 years old, and my parents and I were in Las Vegas. That we would go there every New Year's.
Mhm.
And my grandmother lived in Miami, and my grandparents lived in Miami, the one from Cuba. And so closer to midnight, Nevada time, I feel my chest close, and I feel an instant thought of my grandmother. And I said, have you checked on Abuela? And he is like, no, it's late, because it was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something like that in her time, but I'll call her tomorrow. And that was the moment that she had her fatal heart attack.
Oh.
And it's interesting, because my dad told me years later that before he left for that trip, she kept hugging him and kept saying, tell your mother you love her, and just come here and just spend some time with me. So it was almost like she knew. And if anyone were to tell you that this intuitive self is hereditary or genetic, I would say that it came from her, because she was definitely more santera. Like she had this witchy side to her in Cuba. She always believed in extrasensory and had this kind of extrasensory perception. And she would feel things. And my father would be like, she would see and feel things. And we just thought it was Ma being crazy. But until it showed up in droves with me later, my father was like, I didn't realize how difficult it must have been for her. So that was one of the first experiences. And the next time, I think it was in college, and I was hugging my uncle who I would see every Rosh Hashanah. And, when I hugged him, I had an overwhelming sadness. This was the last time I was going to see him. And 2 days later, he died. And so he was healthy, he was running 5 miles a day. This wasn't, there weren't any signs, but none that I knew of. And so
you weren't at the point where you say anything yet.
No, I wasn't. I did with my grandmother. And when my uncle passed, I did talk to my Orthodox rabbi, and his wife is Cuban. The Rebbetzin is Cuban. And so she's like, there's something in Kabbalah that talks about this, but you cannot study it. And it's very, like, he put the fear of God in me. He's like, I won't study it. I opened the Zohar once and it scared the heck out of me. And so I was like, all right, I just, but because the Rebbetzin was also Cuban, she not only had the strong faith in God, but had the ability to feel these things and understood, because the Hispanic culture leans more into spirituality than the general market. And so I think that was, I had a place to release some of what I was feeling, but it wasn't like I had direction on how to deal with it. So I thought I was willing it to happen, like manifesting it. So I just shut it down until it came down to my own foreboding that I couldn't stop.
Wow, that's a long time in between.
Yeah.
So when you say you shut it down, you didn't sense anything else between?
No, I did sense things, but there were things like, if somebody was sexually abused, or like I had no filter. So I would say things like, oh my God, are you okay? And then I would see the look of horror, and I was like, this is not doing anybody any good, And so I'm like, well, so I was like, I do not want to see any of these things. And so I made it a point to just shut up. And so when you make a solid decision to be like, I do not want to see it, it's not like it just goes away completely. It's just you let the other noise come in and you just get distracted.
You're in the forest, but you're not seeing the trees at this point.
That's correct.
Wow. Yeah. So I have to be transparent. I'm a firm believer of spirits, and I've seen a lot of signs since my late stepfather passed away over 20 years ago in 1999. I mean, the signs have been too many to ignore. Whether you always have believed in this stuff, or all of a sudden some things happen in your life and you're like, okay, you can't really ignore that. And so it's been birds, mostly feathers, colors of the birds, the color red, birds sitting on the neighbor's yard that, like, I'm talking like hawks, birds that never come into this neighborhood, ducks that go into the pool. I mean, things that just never happened before. Yeah. And so, I do want to ask you, like, how now, sort of in your third life, how you help people navigate these spaces that you ignored for so long.
I feel like my calling isn't really to proselytize about spirituality or religion, and I don't feel like it is to force feed people to believe in something if they're on the fence about it. I really feel like
you educate.
I do, but so where I actually lead from, even though I've had the near-death experience, even though I do see spirits, even though I continue to have premonitions and they're kind of crazy, I document everything because I just want to know that I'm not crazy, more so than just, hey, I'm right, but what I do is I tell people that we all have intuition, whether you believe it comes from a spiritual place or whether we are hardwired this way and there's a scientific explanation. It does not matter, as long as you have faith in yourself and believe that what is happening to you is real, because ultimately it can literally save your life and those around you. So the education part of it is to explain what a premonition feels like versus what anxiety or what a casual thought is, for the clinicians, the healthcare workers, to listen to patients differently. Just because they think that, it doesn't add up with the data, doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
Scientific.
Yeah. And so I know medicine is going down a certain path where they're not really worried too much about the outliers. They're looking at the data, getting their checks and balances and moving forward. And I am a living example that the checks and balances didn't add up, even though it did on paper. It did. The patient was already giving you the diagnosis. Now, I'm also smart enough to know that it's not like they were going to go out of their way to prepare for a hysterectomy before I actually needed one. But what they were missing is that I had had a baby before. I had had a C-section before. I work and thrive really well under pressure. I'm not a histrionic, neurotic human being. And this is not typical behavior of their patient. And so maybe listening a little differently would have given me a sense of calm going into the OR, that I had been heard, because I did not know I was ultimately heard.
So for people that haven't read your book, or haven't gone on your website and don't really know what in God's name we're talking about,
Yeah.
can you share with everyone?
Yeah.
I know you've shared it a lot, but it can't be overstated enough how there's more out there and we just don't know
Yeah.
everything.
For the record, I do believe that there's more out there. I do believe that life exists when we physically stop. I do believe that a patient can see and hear you when they're in a coma, that consciousness exists outside of the body. And the reason that I believe all these things is because of what happened. So I was pregnant with our second child, and the first one, I had no complications other than the fact that she was just too big. So I had a C-section. Wasn't a problem. I was back at work 8 days later. It wasn't a big shift in anything. But at the 20-week ultrasound with our son, I was diagnosed with a placenta previa, which is basically the placenta growing on top of the cervix. And in most cases, as the belly grows, as the uterus grows, the placenta will move out of the way, and there's no harm, no foul. And what they kept saying was the worst case scenario is I'd have a C-section. Well, I've had one before. Okay. And like I said, my husband's a PhD from University of Chicago. He's an economist. He testifies as an expert witness. He was a former Air Force pilot. So for him, the data that is given to him about my situation is pretty much a non-issue. I'm having prenatal care. I'm delivering at Northwestern Memorial Hospital Prentice. They deliver 12,000 babies a year. I'm having plenty of care, right? I'm taking care of myself. But in the moment that I was diagnosed with that, I had a very deep knowing, and what I call, what many call intuitive moments, I call a knowing. You don't know how you just do. Every single one of us has had these experiences, whether you are driving someplace and you make a decision to go left instead of right, or you're about to go out with somebody, or you meet somebody, and you're like, something's off. You don't know why this is off, but you just need to learn how to trust it, which has become my mission in helping people trust it more. So, what does one do who feels something? You start Dr. Googling it. So I'm like, okay, what's a placenta previa? What happens? What are the complications? And at some point through my research, I read that a placenta previa can turn into an accreta, which is what Kim Kardashian had, where the placenta merges with the uterus. If that happens, you might need a hysterectomy. If that happens, you might hemorrhage. And if that happens, you and the baby could lose your life. And I sat back and I looked at my husband and I said, this is going to happen to us. The only difference is the baby's going to be fine. And the visions were so detailed. Like as I was reading the words, I saw it unfolding in my mind's eye. Like, okay, I'm going to be cut from sternum to pelvis. I'm going to be intubated. I'm going to be under general anesthesia. I'm like, it was just a download of information in a split second. And again, it was this knowing. I didn't question where I got this information. I didn't question whether I manifested it. I didn't question whether God spoke to me. I didn't question whether this was something energetic. I was like, it was go time, and I had to do anything I could to save my life. So in
And
those
your husband
moments,
looked at you sideways.
oh, completely. Like he was like, what you're afraid of is never going to happen. You know, first of all, where you are in a teaching hospital, they're prepared with emergency drills. You need to relax.
Oh God,
And,
I want to ask this question right now, but I'm going to wait to ask
oh,
this
go ahead. Go
question.
ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
I gotta wait, because if I ask now, it's gonna be out of order. So keep going,
Okay.
and then yeah.
So no, you know, if you saw me on the Today Show with the interview, Megan Kelly said, you know, and she was married to an anesthesiologist. She's like, you know, you don't have to take her word for it. She spoke to everyone, and I did. I spoke to every doctor, every nurse.
Right.
I spoke to, I mean, if you saw me in Starbucks and you were like, oh, how's the pregnancy going? I'd be like, I'm going to die. I mean, I was so matter of fact about it. I mean, friends stayed away from me. They thought Jonathan thought there was something wrong with the baby. I had ultrasounds. I actually sought out the head of obstetric, what was it? A gynecological oncologist, because I had learned that, you know, if I needed a hysterectomy during a procedure, the OB would have to transfer it to maternal fetal medicine, but a gynonc would be one who does mostly high risk surgeries with reproductive organs. And so that's who you want to do it. So making a point, I had MRIs, every test came back negative. And my husband said, you should feel better. And I said, I feel worse because I'm running out of people to tell this crazy foreboding story to. So I took to Facebook. I posted on Facebook, if anybody has my blood type, I'm going to need it. Not because I knew people were going to donate blood, but because maybe somebody would have heard, oh, my cousin had this and it ended up being cancer or whatever. Then it gives me some task to do to try and figure out why I'm feeling this way. I wrote goodbye letters. I sent out goodbye letters. I told people exactly what was going to happen in 2 months' time. And then ultimately I had a final consultation with anesthesia, which I didn't have with my first, but what I didn't know, and for your audience to know, is like the anesthesiologist is there to keep you alive in the OR. And they are, when you say something about things, they are the ones that have a flag in their head of like what could go wrong.
Allergies or anything else.
Yeah. So I had a consultation with Dr. Grace Lim, as you mentioned her early on. And she, you know, tried to calm me down. She said, you know, you're in a teaching hospital. We're prepared for certain things, but, you know, I hope I made you feel better. And I didn't know anything was done other than the fact that she was just listening to me give the spiel that I was giving the last 3 months. So it wasn't anything abnormal. It was just like, okay, here's the last ditch effort. And so at 36 weeks to the day, I was supposed to have a mandatory C-section at 37 weeks, but at 36 weeks to the day, I bleed all over the kitchen floor. I get to the hospital. Jonathan, my husband, is in New York. And you know, I'm ready to deliver this baby. And
were you freaking out because you knew what you knew?
Yeah, I was freaking out because I was trying, you know, I'm Skype chatting with him and I'm writing down these things to him in these loving messages, trying to make him understand that these are the last words he's going to read from me. Like whatever I write here, he's going to read over and over again. And I'm also, I have my 2-year-old there and I'm trying not to cry to scare her. And, you know, and if anybody is understanding like that kind of pressure, it was palpable because I knew the day that I would give birth, I didn't know which day I'd give birth, but the day that I give birth was the day I was going to die. And it was so, the fear was so palpable that, you know, it's almost like when you're being buried alive, and I've never been buried alive, but you can imagine it. Yeah. You're being buried alive and they're putting dirt on top of you and you have your last few breaths to grab because you've got to hold on to breathe however much you can breathe before you know you're going to die. That was the feeling that it was. I get wheeled down to the operating room. I try one more time. I tell my doctor, there's something wrong. You need to put me under general anesthesia. And she's like, Stephanie, I'm not going to do that. It's going to knock out the baby. And I know you're nervous. Jonathan's not here, but we're going to take care of you.
Was that Grace at this point?
No, this was Dr. Levitt. So the one you saw on the Netflix show. And so they wheel me into the OR. And if you know anything about delivery, you're having a C-section. So you have an epidural in, your arms are in a T. They put a curtain in front of your face. So you're not going to see the incisions or anything. And it's not like I could run away from this. I was being wheeled into the room to give life to my son. And it was also the same room that was going to take mine. And so you're in this state of like, you're catatonic, like the fear is so palpable. And so by the time, they delivered Jacob, apparently they said that they were talking to me, but I didn't hear anything. I think that if you believe in being scared out of your body, I think that that's exactly what happened, because I didn't answer them. They delivered Jacob, healthy, happy, everything's fine with him. And then seconds later, I'm dead. Past the pickles.
Past the pickles. Jesus Christ. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And so Grace took notice.
Yeah. So, I ended up, like you said, I had an amniotic fluid embolism, which is a very rare pregnancy complication. It's a 1 in 40,000 risk. Most doctors will never see it in their lifetime. You'll read about it in textbooks. It's basically where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream. And if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into anaphylactic shock. And in most cases, you don't make it. So the first phase is cardiac arrest, lungs collapse, everything. And so I was lucky enough to have a crash cart there, be intubated, and only had flatline for 37 seconds. And once you're back up, that's when the second phase starts, which is DIC, which is the body's inability to clot blood, which anesthesiologists have thoughtfully created an acronym called death is coming. So your body has 20 units of blood normally. I'm O negative, which was also a fear of mine.
That's not universal. O positive is universal.
It's a universal donor, but I can only receive O negative.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So I was given 60 units of blood and blood product to save my life. And there were a couple of things in the OR I didn't predict. And there was a crash cart and there was extra blood waiting for me. And it turned out that Dr. Grace Lim, felt uncomfortable. She told me later, she felt uncomfortable with our conversation. She said she had never had a patient speak so clearly about what was going to happen, had a baby before, had a C-section.
Who had no medical experience. Like you didn't know this field or this space at all.
And had sought out specialists to save her life. And with that one phone call, she's the one that flagged my file, incorporating those extra measures in the operating room. And that's why I'm alive today.
Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So now I got to ask the question. What did your husband say after the fact once you got past that, period?
So I had him write a chapter in the book that he just didn't want to write. And because you're an audiobook fan, he had to voice it. The audiobook was very, very difficult, more than anything else. And I just did the audiobook in January. So so he says he didn't think twice about certain things, but we haven't unwrapped all of it, but I'm giving him the time to take layer by layer at a time, because I still believe, as strong a man as he is and as solid as he is, we all react to trauma differently. And in his mind, he, post everything, he's happy we dodged a bullet. But the reality is the bullet hit me dead on. I survived the bullet. And it's that kind of switch in thinking that has been painful. But what he did was, as soon as he got to the hospital, he had texted the doctor, and the doctor was like, how's everything? And the doctor's like, the baby's fine and Stephanie's stable. And he's smart enough to know that's not good. And so he got to the 8th floor delivery. My doctor, Julie Levitt, had blood all over her scrubs. And she said, there were some complications. I'm going to sit you in the consultation room. The anesthesiologist will be here. And Dr. Higgins, the one that actually did the resuscitation and the crash cart, she sat with Jonathan. She explained what had happened. And then
he must have been freaking the fuck out.
But he will tell you he went into autopilot mode. So
well, he's a numbers guy. So he can go and be a process person in that moment.
And interestingly enough, anesthesiologists say, anesthesiologists and pilots think the same way. So they appreciated the fact that he was not emotional, that he was very much focused on what's morbidity, mortality. What do we need to do? What does she need? What, where do we go on this stage? So that makes their job a little easier. But he did tell her if she needs a hysterectomy, this is the doctor we met with 2 months before. And she thought that was odd. Said, she said, I remember her telling me later that she's like, I thought it was odd, but you wouldn't have survived another surgery. Plus we thought you were stable. So they had stabilized the bleed and they put me into the surgical ICU. And that's kind of where you see all I only have a few photos from that because Jonathan took those photos. And that's how he found me, was exactly like that. Was the next time he saw me. And so he's sitting with the machines breathing for me. You're hearing everything. Interestingly enough, the life support machine that I was on was the number 18, which in the Jewish religion is life. It's high,
Unbelievable.
But I didn't see the number on the machine until years later. It's like a friend of mine was like, did you take a look at your life support machine? And it was like a random numbered unit. Right. And so
random my ass.
I believe in all the signs, but it's just very interesting. And so I think after 7 hours of him listening to the machines, they realized that the bleed was still happening, and they called in the doctor, the gynonc that I had met with 2 months before, who performed the hysterectomy. The pathology on the uterus showed that an accreta had started to form, but the MRI didn't pick it up when it picked it up. And yeah, everything happened the way I said it was going to happen.
And what did you see when you were dead? Because that part is interesting to me as well.
Yeah.
Like, that's just unbelievable. You didn't just see like the white light, right? You saw like what was going on in there.
It's so interesting because you're Jewish. It's really interesting to have a conversation with you because, so I was on the Steve Harvey show, and Steve said, did you see the light? And I said, I don't know, man, they gave me a lot of drugs. I didn't, I wasn't afraid to say I didn't, but what you don't see on the Netflix stuff is all the details that you read about in the book. But when I went back in using hypnotherapy, I was able to pick up everything that happened prior, during, and after. And so everything I'm telling you is post, but it was verified and validated afterwards. So,
ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief clip of Stephanie's hypnotherapy session. And we're going to bring that to you right now. And just warning to everyone that this, might be a little bit upsetting to you. So fast forward this, feel free. Otherwise, we're going to bring this to you, and then we'll talk about it.
And the EKG machine went flat, and I was done, and my body just collapsed. And I heard them say, hit the button, call the code, hit the button. I hit the button, and 40 doctors and nurses just rushed in.
Let me transcribe that for all of you in case it was hard to hear. And then she's turning blue, and the EKG machine went flat, and I was done. And my body just collapsed. And I heard them say, hit the button, call the code. Hit the button, 40 doctors and nurses just rushed in. Whew, that was heavy. I hadn't seen that footage before. So what about when you flatlined? Because I know you heard things and saw things that were a little bit different than what people might expect. You know, the traditional white light or, other things that people typically see when they go to the other side.
I had seen when I had flatlined hundreds of spirits. I didn't see God. I saw a triangle of light, which I don't talk about. And I was having this conversation with this rabbi last night because he is a near-death experiencer. And he was like, well, why it was a triangle. And I'm like, well, if I'm not Jewish, I would say Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then, the Jewish perspective is like, is it Israelites, Levites, and Kohanim, or is it, or is it the upside down triangles in the Star of David, and what that means. And
wow.
So I'm still looking at that. I don't know whether I'll ever be able to prove any of it, but it's kind of comforting knowing that some people have heard some of that information. And then, but the interesting thing is, when I've read articles about people who've been traumatized or have gone through near-death experiences in Psychology Today, there were articles about how it's wishful thinking that your loved ones are there, right? It's like, okay, of course you want your loved ones to welcome you in your death-defying, experiences or your close death experience. And so, I said, okay, we'll put a pin in that one. But it's the ones I did not know that had messages for the ones that I do know here in this living earth that caught me by surprise, seeing Jonathan's father, who had passed in 1998, who I didn't know, or my best friend's little brother, who was 7 at the time of his death. And so it was just those kind of things that kind of threw me for a loop and making me realize that there's just more to this than just wishful thinking.
That is amazing. Have you had anything since?
Yeah.
Oh boy. So do you reach out now to change the course of someone's path?
So it's interesting. So the podcast that I'm launching is called Knowing, right? And I'm hearing stories from people who've had experiences that they've witnessed, they've inserted themselves into the narrative. They didn't, dreams that they've had, just to show that it's out there. This isn't just my story. A lot of people have these stories. And this one guy in my pilot episode, has made the decision afterwards that he is no longer going to insert himself into the narrative because he feels that he's interfering with other people's karma. And I respectfully disagreed with him. I said, you might not be able to change the outcome, but given the information, maybe it prepares the person differently than if it comes out of left field, right? There is a woman who told me a story about a dream that she had, and it involved her cousin, and the details are unimportant, but she had told the cousin that he was going to be killed a certain way. And he's like, what, are you a psychic now? And I never go here and I never do this, whatever. So she felt foolish, but it stayed with her. It haunted her. So she had told him. And then, 2 years later, it happened exactly the way she said it would. And I said to her, oh my God, I'm like, what, like in shock. And she's like, Stephanie, but I realized that the premonition wasn't for him. He's like a brother to me. And so when I had that vision and I told him about it, I had mourned the loss and the shock the first time I had the vision. So 2 years later, when it happened, it wasn't a surprise. And so do I believe that you can change outcome? Well, Jonathan and I argue a lot about predetermination and free will. I do believe everybody has an expiration date. And I'm not messing with that. The thing is that Northwestern at the time had only had 10 AFEs, amniotic fluid embolisms, in their history. 6 did not make it, and the other 3 are in permanent vegetative states. So maybe I was never going to expire at that time, but how well I survived was due to my free will. So I don't think they're on the same path. I feel like they are on different paths. I think your expiration date is your expiration date, and how you get there, where you meander is your free will to take a left or a right, but you're still going to expire on this day. Doesn't make a difference. That day is your day that you're not going to get out of.
But isn't it the same if somebody read something in a book and a light clicked, or a light went on, or if they got information from a person, that had a premonition, and then you're just planting the seed. It's up to that person as to whether or not they want to do something about it.
Maybe, but if their expiration is their expiration, it's like you are giving certain insight or information. Now that, maybe that you were planted in their karmic path in order to help them avoid a rough patch where they didn't need to go, but their expiration might still be in June, but your information you gave them in February is going to help them not be completely a vegetable until June when they expire. So that's the way I look at it. If I'm given information, like you asked, yes, the premonitions keep coming, but what I do now, especially when it comes to family and close friends, I soften the blow a little bit. I don't just come out where I used to be like, oh, you need your blood checked and check that, like that. I don't. What I do now is, like, we were in Israel for my daughter's bat mitzvah, and we were walking through a park to get to our hotel in Tel Aviv, and I had an overwhelming feeling that a drug deal was gone and it was going to go bad. And so instead of waiting for it to happen, I said to my husband, I feel like this is happening on the far right corner of this park. So just be alert and let's just get through and keep our eye on the prize to get out of the park. And because we were alert and aware, nothing happened. Now, does that mean the drug deal ever happened or didn't happen? I don't know. But do I need to turn around and prove that it was going to happen? And if the only thing I did was stay on alert, I think it's worth it to be a little more vigilant when you have those feelings.
Oh man, I could talk about this for hours. So talk about Netflix and the book and the differences between, what people are to expect, if they're watching Netflix versus, obviously books are always more detailed, right?
Yeah, it's much more detailed, and you get more history and all of the signs and everything, like you love so much, kind of like all of it just comes together and you're like, holy shit. And for Jonathan, it's definitely his journey too, even though he's like, oh, it's your book, but you'll see, like, it took a long time. I mean, I think the book was due like in 2 weeks, and Jonathan refused to write this chapter. And I was like, I need this chapter. And he's like, hey, this is your book. I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, I can't talk about when I was in a coma, and everybody wants to know, what the hell were you thinking now that everything came to fruition? And so it took him a long time, but then ultimately when he wrote it, I understood why it took so long. It's incredibly raw and painful.
And like you said, everybody grieves differently.
They do. And I have to give him, I have to give him props for doing it in his way. I mean, when I speak at medical conferences, I asked him to speak at a national conference with like 3,000 nurses. And he's like, they don't want to hear from me. I said, I think they do. And so he got up and he spoke from the patient's family perspective of what they did to support the family. And it was invaluable. I mean, they cry to this day when people see it or speak about it. It's like, they never get that perspective. And even from the Netflix series, if you watch the entire series, there's nobody on there that their loved one is right next to them talking about the story, which I thought was odd. I was like, this is a journey we were on together. And everybody that's had these kind of profound experiences, their loved one is affected by it. And so that's one thing you'll get from Netflix that you won't get from because he doesn't do interviews. And so that's the only time he actually agreed to do a 2-shot. And then that's when the press called me a sleeper star, because every time he was saying something in his analytical way, I was like, are you really? like rolling my eyes, like I was the one that's saying, I don't believe in coincidences.
Right.
That is statistically impossible.
Right. I was going to say it had to be a numbers thing.
It was painful. It's still to this day. Like I was explaining to, we were at my daughter's field hockey game. I'm just sitting randomly next to a guy who ended up, his father sits on the board of University of Miami and was sitting having lunch with his best friend from camp. This guy is 82 years old. His best friend from camp is my grandmother's brother's son.
Oh my gosh.
And I said to Jonathan, I said, you call that not a coincidence? And he is like, yep. Just a random thing. I said, you're an idiot, but you know, it's hard.
Tell everybody about the bikini contest, because I want to hear about that before we get to the rapid fire, because I think because you sent me a picture of both you being intubated and in the hospital, one of those couple of pictures that your husband took, and then the right next to it was you in this contest, and oh man, what an inspiration.
Thank you. No, it was I was tired of hearing myself complain. There was no way I was going under the knife to do a mommy makeover. I have massive scarring, you know, down the center of my abdomen. It keloided and it herniated. So I had to have mesh put into my stomach. So there were so many surgeries there, and no plastic surgeon would even touch it in case I would lose blood supply to my belly button.
Right.
So I was living with this, like, just a hysterectomy. So I had my choice taken away from me, even though I might not have wanted more children. I didn't have the option.
Mm-hmm.
I had my body just scarred up, and I grew up in Miami. So for, you know, growing up in Miami where the clothes are like nothing, you know, I lost all of that kind of sexiness in my mind. Now, my husband didn't feel that way. My husband's like, if I had all those scars, you would still think I was hot and sexy and everything. I said, yes, but it's different for a woman who is just like all chopped up. So I was tired of hearing myself complain. And so then we get back from a trip, and I said, you know what, I'm a total immersion kind of person, but a short term total immersion. I'm not an athlete. I'm not someone who likes group sports. I don't even like step classes. Like, I'm not coordinated. I am creative, but with ADHD, right? So it's like, as you could tell from this conversation, right? So
that makes two of us.
Right. And I learned this later in life, right? So I was doing my research, and it was like this whole bikini bodybuilding competition was like 16 weeks, right? I'm like, okay, I can do anything for 16 weeks, but you have to have a goal, right? You know, whenever I worked on a TV show or I ever did anything, there was a goal. There's a beginning, there's prep, pre-production, production, and post. And I looked at this as like a 3 to 4 month kind of commitment. And I said, no matter what, it's going to be better than where I am today if I do something consistently, right? So I found a professional like IFBB Pro. She took one look at me and she said, you work out? And I was like, I do. She's like, with weights? And I'm like, fuck you. And so, and then I had a premonition about her, and I started like vomiting everything. And that woman, who is like a beast, like she's an IFBB Pro, but physique. So she is a big, like, beast of a woman.
Yeah.
She was crying in a puddle in front of me because of everything I saw. Her mother had passed. I saw her mother. I had all these messages that came through the floodgates. And so she's like, all right, I guess we're stuck with each other, right? So so I'm glad I didn't know all the details about everything I needed to do. She's like, let's take it week by week.
Right. Oh man.
But I started to see, like, after 3 weeks where I was headed, and I was like, okay, I'm starting to get a little bit of muscle and then growing. And I couldn't do the things that most competitors do, which is I couldn't dehydrate because I had kidney failure. So I couldn't take certain supplements. And for any of you that know about what, like, some of these bodybuilding competitions are, like, the supplements and what you're doing to pull out water, I'm like, I can't do that. You know, I'm not going to take a chance on my kidneys falling offline. So, so I went in it with an open heart. I did not I had zero intention on getting on a stage. I couldn't even, I mean, I had no equilibrium or stability in my stomach and my
Right.
abdomen. So,
Your
and
core.
so,
Yeah.
so my core was like, I mean, it was completely severed from the rest of my body, energetically, physically. I had
Yeah.
diastasis, like I had all of these things, and the abdomen, which you know is the last to come in when you're
Right.
doing anything like this. So that was the bane of my existence, because I kept, no matter everything else around me was growing beautifully, perfectly, the abdomen was still, I was like, it's not there. But then as I got closer and closer, she's like, you're getting on that stage. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And then Jonathan was like, honey, I want you to get on the stage. And I'm like, you
Wow.
just want me in the stripper heels and glittery bikini. And then I felt strong enough that I'm like, you know what? I'm inspiring myself. I'm like, and all these, and I was 48 when I did it. And I was like,
Unbelievable.
for the women that are sitting there saying they can't afford plastic surgery, or they need to have it in order to get their body back in shape. I'm like, you know what? I'm walking the walk. I'm going to present it and be like, you can, it wasn't about any trophies. It wasn't about any win. It wasn't
Nope.
about competition. It was about like, holy shit, look at where I went from and look at where I am. And I took home second place in my category, and
Unreal.
then top 5. That was the crazy thing. I was 5th in the top 5, but I was against 20-year-olds and girls
Unbelievable.
certain steroids and dehydrating. And I was just like,
Right.
I was like, well, this is what you got. So yeah.
That is unbelievable. Fascinating.
It's,
Oh my goodness. What a great story. I love it.
yeah. I mean, you look, and what they don't tell you is you look great, but you don't smell great. Like,
Right.
I don't know what that's from all the protein, right? Because I was just
Yeah.
like, this is disgusting. Jonathan's like, I want to have sex with you, but you don't smell great. So it's like, if you don't have a pizza, I'm not interested in sex with
This
you
is
right
this
now.
type of stuff that Jubins typically do not talk about publicly, for the
No.
record.
They don't. They don't. The demure,
Oh man. Well, it seems like your marriage has strengthened because of this whole experience, and it seems like your communication is amazing, and just lessons that every kid can learn from, just every couple could learn from, and just the
But it doesn't.
layers are endless.
Well, I don't want
Ah,
the audience to think that it doesn't come without struggles, right?
well,
Because
yeah, of course.
for several years post, I had a feeling of I wasn't protected. My husband, the
Oh,
one person who I trust with my heart and soul, that I lean into, that I am completely enamored by, is didn't listen to me. And so in the recovery, it took several years to go through the process of, you didn't hear me. And now how do I trust that you can hear me? And so the intimacy takes a major hit, then his insecurity hits, then mine,
wow.
because I don't feel sexy. And like, so then all of a sudden you're having lack of intimate moments, and then you're like, okay, well, what do we have here? And so it takes an effort and a desire to rebuild or build off of something new and what your new normal is. So nothing happens without a lot of push to make it happen, as we see with anything. But yeah,
I appreciate you being so open and honest and candid about that. And it's interesting. Do you look at it now where you know each other better, and like maybe your love languages are different, and so that explains some of it?
it is. And I think that's what's making this, I think that's what the producer felt in the first draft that he had read, and why the talent wasn't jumping on. He's like, I think you need to go back to your truth. And I felt like I was writing a fictionalized version of it, like a notebook version of a spiritual experience. And he's like, go back to the truth. And I told Jonathan this actually 2 nights ago. I said, these experiences we've had over the last few months have made me not just a better writer, but explain in great detail that feeling that I feel of just leaning so far in that, and it's not to take it into a dark place, but it's like a feeling like just, I don't even have another word for it other than that I'm owned. Like, he owns me. Like, it's not in a weird way, but it's almost like I'm not going anywhere. Like there's no plan B, there's no option, anything. It's like, there's no one who knows me more, and vice versa. Like there's no one who knows us more, where we have this level of such profound trust and love. That's like, I just want everybody to have that, but it comes from a level of honesty of just sharing just your biggest fears, and also feeling like you can lean into them, and that other person has you, and has you with their safety net.
Well, everyone has a different definition of for better, for worse.
Yeah.
And you certainly have tapped into that over
Mhm.
the last several years. And both of you seem like you're better versions of yourself and following your inner compasses and your inner voices in a way that maybe you couldn't possibly have before all
Yeah.
of this. And that is fascinating.
Thank you.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you.
Definitely. Let's get to the rapid fire. Your time is incredibly valuable, if that's okay. We got some.
Sure.
Okay. What's next on your bucket list?
To get the movie out. I finished the screenplay for the 39th time, and I'm just now on, I have
Ugh.
Hawk Koch, who is the president of the Academy Awards, optioned the rights. I have a
Wow.
second producer on there who teaches screenwriting at USC. So they're mentoring me to get this done. And so the more that we talk about this, the more, and that's why I do the Clubhouse once a week. I want to have like-minded individuals there to share their stories, to know that there's a safe space for them to not be judged over the fact that they believe in things that they can't see. And some of those things can kill you. So yeah.
It reminds me of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, where people were inspired and you just couldn't help but believe there's too many of the stories. And when we're living in a time of so much division, you know, this type of thing is so important for people to have hope. You know, more people are depressed. You just don't know the extension, the extrapolation of where this might be able to go for people. So that's just amazing. Hopefully sooner than later. So speaking of movies, what's your favorite movie of all time?
Wow. That is hard. I loved movies from
Of course you did.
Dead Poet Society. I loved,
We could talk about Robin Williams too. Talk about mental
yeah,
health. Oh,
mental health is I mean, Citizen Kane.
favorite musical artist of all time.
I love the Grateful Dead.
Wow. Barry Manilow and the Grateful Dead.
You
I never
didn't
would have
expect
expected
that. I
either one of
know. I
those.
know you didn't expect
Has anyone
that.
ever asked you these questions?
No, this is
Wow.
fun. I love
Wow.
this.
Favorite Yiddish word: shtick, mashugana, putz, tuchus, or chutzpah?
Probably I use shtick more than anything.
Of course you would. Yeah, schmuck's a good one too. I didn't have that in the list, but I probably should have added that one. Matzo ball soup, gefilte fish, or latkes?
I am a sucker for latkes with sour cream.
Oh, applesauce?
Sour cream.
Just sour cream. Wow.
What are you doing in your life, and then make that decision to launch this podcast, and what?
Well, I initially was just talking sports because I know sports so well. And then I just realized that something spoke to me being from Detroit. And I was like, I can't be complicit anymore. Like, this is just ridiculous. And so I don't want to force it down people's throat like you talked about earlier, but I also have to do something different as a white ally. And so African Americans and people of color and the Latino and Latina community and the LGBTQ community, a lot of these different spaces have been preaching and talking and begging and yelling and screaming at mountaintops for years. And other people are so arrogant to tell them about themselves and not doing something about it, whether it's just simply pushing the conversation forward, not in the face of another murder, but just continuing to talk about it and to be a part of policy changes and mobilization so that things do change and the narratives shift and we bridge gaps, because there's still too many disconnects and gaps between women of color and people of color. And forget about reparations on all the other discussions we could talk about. But and then to answer your second part of your question, long term, I don't know where it's going. I'm letting it grow organically. We think about, have we had a good life? And have we either done our bucket list stuff or, are we making the most of every day?
Yeah.
So it is way better than most. how to make the most of every day and not waste any time and still find that balance, that you need in your life every day, whether it's meditating or yoga, recharging your batteries,
I'm in
decompressing.
menopause now. It sucks.
God dang it. It is bullshit.
Such fucking bullshit. Yeah. You
So
think
I
you
don't
got it figured out and then you get
Yeah.
sideswiped, but yeah.
Bam. Oh my God. Sorry. Women do not have it as easy as guys. That's for damn sure in any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I don't know if I'll get picked up at some point. I don't know if this is what I'm going to do. And I just, I've wanted to always impact and not care about income. So that's what I'm
I
doing.
mean, you actually are a great interviewer. You have really good skills and good instinct on it. So from someone who's worked in TV most of her career, it's nice to see, and you're getting me to talk about stories I don't really talk about. So, so it's good. You have a natural ability.
Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you. And so now I've listened to more stories about people on here who have talked about depression, who've talked about killing themselves. You've talked about dying, literally. And so, the more people die while they're living, it helps them to be more in touch with, life as they move forward. Man, amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough. You could be going on, Conan or somebody in the evening, and you're spending 90 minutes with us. I truly can't thank you enough.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so
It's
I'll stay.
it's like you say, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I spent time on Dr. Oz, and that was not impactful whatsoever. That was just a waste of time. But I'd rather be here and have a laugh and have a moment, and you never know who's listening. And just like with Breakfast with Champions, you talk about the story, you're there, and then you're like, okay, you're off, and you have no idea who has just heard that message.
You poured into me, and hopefully you got some value in this safe space, and I truly appreciate you being with us today. Amazing.
You got more than I thought you were going to get with Barry Manilow, but
Oh, all right. We'll stay in touch, and anytime you want to come back and co-host with me, if I get anyone else on, I would love to have your perspective. And we'll have a phenomenal day. And man, I'm so inspired today. I can't wait to take on the day and pay it forward. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk soon. All right. Bye. Wow. That was something. If you stayed with us for the entire time, I hope that you got a lot of value out of that. Definitely a different level of conversation with her, and pushed my comfort zone to some places that I hadn't gone before. And so always would appreciate your feedback. If you want to leave a review and let me know what you think about the interview, about Stephanie, about myself, anything that you could suggest to make things better. Just again, any suggestions or disagreements would be welcomed. So on that note, hopefully you learned a lot and made you think a little bit about the direction that you're going and where you want to go, and about communication, about relationships, trusting your instincts and your intuition, and being present. There's something to be said for that, even though it's really hard that we're always on the go. Something like this podcast makes us pause because we're going so fast with life that you don't see the trees when you're in the middle of the forest. Thanks for joining us again today. We truly hope that we added some value to your life to help you believe in your compass, listen to your inner voice, trust your gut, and follow your sixth sense, your intuition. Remember, you can always send us an email to followyourintuitionpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, remember everyone, follow your intuition. Peace.